Well, welcome back. This is lesson 4 of the AQS Let's Quilt with Bonnie, 6 panel quilts in 6 weeks. So we're ready to work on our 4th quilt. And let me tell you what we're going to do today. I'm starting with a panel, and this panel is called Ironweed in the Fog, and it's by Starforest Quilts. She takes photographs and manipulates them and then prints them on fabric. So it's going to be fun for us to put 3 mitered borders on this quilt today. So for the fabric, we have the panel itself, and then I chose an ombre fabric that goes from purple to light gray for one border, and I did border number 1 and border number 3 is in this fabric that is two-toned in purple. And so you can see all the purple flowers. It kind of reminds me of lavender in a way. So you can see that it's got different purples in there. So that's what I chose as both the inner and the outer border. The ombre is kind of fun to work with. And what I chose to do, because if you do a whole border, one end of it's going to be light and the other end of it's going to be dark, isn't it? So I decided that I would have opposing corners. These two would be dark and these two would be light. And what it does is it kind of sends like a streak of light right through the panel. So I'm going to tell you how we do it now. Because we're putting 3 borders on, so I have a narrow inner border. Here's my ombre border and the wider outer border. One of the things that you want to do when you do multiple miters is you want to do them all at once when you miter the corners. So what we're going to do is we are going to sew all 3 borders together. Before we can do that, we need to know how long to cut the fabric, don't we? So before we sew these, I've got one more seam to sew on this set. We're going to start with the handout. And in the handout is a formula. And the formula tells you how to measure for the width and also how to measure for the length. And if your panel was square, then it would just be 1 dimension. But what you're going to do is you're going to measure the width of the panel, and then we're going to add a border to 2 sides, right? The right and left. And so we need to add the measurement of the panel plus the finished width of the border times 2. We've got 2 of them. And then I always add, instead of a 1/2 inch or 7/8 of an inch, because you're really making a half square triangle in the corner, I always add 1 whole inch. And if you do that, your pieces are never going to be too small. So we would measure for the first one. All right, so now when you get ready to go number 2, because you won't have cut anything yet, you're going to take the dimension that you ended up with on border 1. So I had 31 1/4, so that's what I started with when I wrote my dimension for border 2. And then border 2 is a little wider, so you're going to take 2 times that. Plus, I actually added 2 inches of this because I really didn't know what was going to happen with that ombre fabric. And so then you end up with a dimension. I had 1 dimension that ended up in 16ths. Don't work in 16ths. Just round it up to the next 1/8. It won't hurt if you add a 16th of a bit too long. Might hurt if you added it too short. So you just want to go up a notch and cut it just a little bit bigger. And then I'll take that dimension from number 2 and we'll put it in my formula down here for border number 3. And once you've done that, then you can go cut your borders. Now I did have to piece my ombre, and I really didn't know at first whether I wanted to piece it in the dark part or whether I wanted to piece it on the light end. And I really felt like it would show less in the darker because that color is going to recede a little bit. So that's what I did, and I already have those borders sewn on here, and I'll show those to you when we get a chance to unfold the panel here. Well, so the calculation, it isn't hard math. You're just going to add, take 2 times the width of your finished border, and then we're adding 2 inches on for seam allowances. And if you just work through the paperwork, you're going to see it's really not a difficult math to have to do. So, all right, so now that you know how to work with the formulas, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut our fabric and we're going to get ready to sew it. I'm going to sew this for you, and we're going to take a short word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back and sew.
Starforest Quilts offers a variety of quilt kits and panels made from nature photographs. Included in the mix are several whole cloth quilt panels. The kits are easy to assemble, and all pieces are labeled in the seam allowance. The Ironmatic Space Saver is an award-winning ironing board. It's ergonomic and user-friendly. Strap your iron directly to it and hang it behind a door or in a wardrobe to keep it hidden out of the way. Visit ironmatic.com to get yours today.
Okay, so now you can see I have all 3 of my borders here, and I'm getting ready to pin the outside one on. I've already sewn this one on, but you can see that I have a pretty sharp crease right here in the center. And I just press that crease in there rather than put pins in. It makes it so that you're going to have to line up both sides of that. So rather than pin both sides of that center one, I just did a nice crease, and I've also creased the purple one. But what I want to show you is you can see how the borders, this one's shorter, a little bit longer, and a little bit longer. And the difference between those should be if you folded this into a half square triangle, kind of like we were going to do a miter, that's how much longer the other one should be. Now, if you wanted to cut all your borders the same length, you certainly could do that. You'll have a little bit of, well, you'd have this much waste on borders 1 and 2 if you cut them all exactly the same length. You can see that we will not have very much waste by using the formula. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to pin this border on. And when I put borders on my quilts, this is exactly the way I do it, whether I'm doing a miter or not. I always start in the middle, and here's my crease. And I'm going to be using this special guide that goes with the 97D foot here on this Bernina. So I'm going to put my pins in so that they face out rather than in, so that I can pull them from the left and they won't run into the guide. So now I'm going to lay this out here on the table so that it's good and flat. And now I'm just going to go along and put some pins in just to hold that while I'm sewing. Okay, so that's half of it. Now I'm just going to slide it down, and I'm going to do the other half. Okay, so now this is just a real easy 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to press it. And you can see that ombre fabric is a little ravelly. And I don't know about you, but I like to get rid of those as I find them rather than have to go back at the end and cut off tails. We're going to set our seams. And now I'm going to press the border toward the purple. so there won't be any shadowing through on this light fabric that I've used for the center border. Okay, now so now I have all three borders all sewn together. Now, in preparation for putting this on the panel, I'm going to again press me a crease in the shortest one, because that's the one that will be sewn to the panel. We'll just put us a little crease in there. Okay. All right, I'm going to get this ready to be able to sew it to the quilt. And while I do that, we're going to give you a short word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Tracy's Tables has all of your custom sewing table needs. Visit tracystables.com to see the complete line of unique tables, carts, and shelves. And all of Tracy's Tables are made in the USA.
All right, so now I'm ready to pin this to the quilt. And so I have my creased mark on the purple, and I folded the panel in half and put in a pin so that I could get the half mark there. And just like we sewed the other border, the borders together, we're gonna lay it out here. Now I do want to show you one thing that I've done, and that is we're going to stop and start sewing 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the panel. So I've marked each corner with a 1/4 of an inch square right there, so I know exactly where to start and stop. So when I get ready to pin that part, I will just pin right up to that. The fabric of this panel is a little bit heavier, and it's really nice to sew on. Now, I will tell you that this is the border I've already sewn on, and we're going to want to make sure we keep that out of the way. So I'm just going to fold it out of the way, and I'm going to put a pin in it to keep it out of my way so it doesn't accidentally flip over on the top or the bottom and mess up so we have to rip out a seam. We don't want to do that if we don't have to. And speaking of ripping out seams, if you're using this fabric that's the ombre, well, I just want you to notice that on one side it's got color, and on the other side it's white. I sewed one whole panel together with it upside down, which meant I had to rip out both of those long seams. And of course, you know Alan, he sneaked in here with a camera to take a picture just so he could show it to you too. Okay, so we're gonna lay this out flat just like we did before and pin it to the edge of the panel. And again, when I get over here to the corner, you'll see that I have marked that 1/4 of an inch square in the corner. And I'm going to fold the one that I've already sewn. Just going to get it straightened out here. Fold it back out of the way, and we're going to pin that in place. It's real easy for that to just flop somehow, and you end up with stitching into it. Okay, now we're ready to sew. And I use my flywheel on my machine to set this needle in here. You want to put it in the last hole right there. The last hole from sewing on the previous border. There'll be a hole right there where you stop sewing. That's where you want to put your needle down. Okay, so now when I get close to the end here, I'm going to get my pin out of the way, but I'm going to leave it there. And I'm just going to go slow as I approach so that I can stop one more stitch. Okay, and now I'm going to back stitch a couple stitches and cut the thread. And now this border is sewn on. It's the bottom border that I just sewed onto it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the iron and just press that seam so that it goes toward the purple border. And so now you can see we have two overlapping borders right here at the corners. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to mark those miters, and while I get ready to do that, there will be a short word from our sponsors, and when we come back, we'll be working on the back side of the quilt, and we'll get the miters marked and sewn.
As any artist will tell you, hitting the perfect notes means finding the perfect instrument, Bernina. So get the machine that always hits the right chord and start making beautiful music together. Bernina, made to create.
Panasonic.
Okay, so now we're ready to mark these miters. And I know that you will read in many books that you want to put your 45-degree angle on the outside edge. I put my 45-degree angle on that seam that we just sewed. And the reason I do that is if you wavered at all in your seam allowances, if your cutting was not exactly right, your 45-degree angle may not come out right. But you know that this is a given. You've sewn this line, so let's measure off of that. So what I've done is I've laid out both borders, put one underneath the other. I've got this one good and flat. Here's the seam we just sewed. And I have two markers. I need something to mark on the light color, and I have the sew line white chalk to mark on the purple. And so I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to lay my 45-degree angle. And so you want to make sure you double check because there's also a 60-degree angle on here and a 30-degree angle, and you don't want the wrong angle. All right, so I've laid that right on my seam line that I just sewed, and I need the white pencil. And I need the dark one first here. I take my pencil and put it right in that corner and shove that ruler right up next to it, and then make sure you're still all aligned on your seam line. And so now I'm going to draw. And so now, since I have this one in my hand, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to draw on the light colored. And then we'll go back and we'll draw the white line. And I find sometimes I have to mark over twice, and just make sure you don't drag because this is a bias edge that you're drawing here. Okay, so we can see both of those to sew. Okay, so now we're going to take the same, put that one underneath, and we're going to lay this one on top. You need to make sure you get it so you can see this seam line right here. All right, and so here's my 45-degree angle from this angle. Double check it. Put it on my seam line. There we go. We have our marks all lined up, ready to sew. So the next thing we do is we're going to pick up these borders and the quilt, and we have to hold it at an angle, a 45-degree angle. You're going to kind of try to line up your borders. And I will tell you, I usually pick this up because I want to see where this purple is, or the white is on this purple, and it's right here. All right, so you can see I've got to get these lined up better. All right, I think that's closer. Now, the key spots that we have to make sure that are aligned are where these borders are attached to one another. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin through right at that X on this one. And I'm going to stick it through, and now I'm going to flip it over. Wowee, I can tell you that's probably about as close as I've ever come to having that pin fit exactly where it needed to fit. But it's still just a couple threads off, and that may not sound like much, but if your points don't come together right there, it will be visible. So I'm just going to put my thumb where it needs to go, and I'm going to take my needle and I'm just going to move it that much. Now, this is what I call a positioning pin. And the positioning pin really is just holding those two layers together, and I've got the pin straight up and down. So now I'm going to take another pin, and I'm going to come in and just take a small little bite right next to that to hold those layers together. I'm going to put a pin on both sides of that positioning pin. You know, years ago when I used to do a lot of hand piecing, I never could get my pieces on top to line up with the pieces on the bottom, or I couldn't get my thread. Well, and so Carla Hassel, who wrote one of the very first quilt books in the 70s, I think, was at our guild, and so I was telling her that, and she said, well, what happens when you put that pin in and you twist it, you have just moved the bottom fabric forward just enough that your stitches don't line up. So ever since then, I have been using the positioning pin. All right, so we're going to do the same thing with this spot right here. Well, and you can see now in this one I had to move it just ever so bit more, because it needs to be right there. So there's the positioning pin. Get those layers together right there. Okay, so now once you've pinned those, most of the time if you put a pin through right here, it'll be on the line on the back side too. So again, I'll just use that as a positioning pin to hold it, and I'll put one pin in. All right, so now let's come out here and work on this end of it. Now that we've got those lined up, well, I think we're pretty close. So let's put one right here. Not quite. It's off just a couple threads. And I hope some of you will try these mitered borders like this and put them on one of your panels. Do you know what? It looks like you are a very experienced quilter, And I hope that I've made this easy enough for you that anybody can do this kind of a border on your quilt or on one of the panels. I just thought this one deserved to have a little fancier border on it. Okay, so now when you get up here to this other end, we've got the point, and you just need to fold that out of the way because we need to be able to put our needle right there. And I can just tell you that this is always hard, well, particularly on this purple fabric, but I'm just going to make myself a white mark so I know where my needle has to go in. Okay, now, you know, I put this guide on here. Well, I can't use that guide if I'm going to sew down the middle of a piece of fabric. So I'm just going to unscrew this and take it off of here. And if you're doing a lot of piecing or a lot of straight lines like I was on all these borders, this is a really good tool to add to your arsenal, is that fabric guide. Okay. So again, I need to put that needle right, and I'm going to use my flywheel because I want to make sure I get it right in the spot where I needed it. And the one reason you want to make sure you hit that spot with your needle is that sometimes when you get it all done, there will be a hole right there. So if you stop there and then you start there, you shouldn't end up with any holes in your fabric. Just going to take a couple little back stitches right there, then just secure those threads. Okay, here comes the big reveal. This is when you want to make sure you hold your mouth just right. All right, so I'm just going to take this, and do you see we didn't have very much that we're wasting of cutting those borders the length we did. So I'm going to, we would open up these seams and we would press it, but I won't do that until I've checked it. And here's some more of those darn ravels. You know what? That ombre fabric seems to be really ravelly. But what we want to check is right here. Does those points meet? Those points meet. And right here's the corner of our quilt. And once we know that these are okay, then I'm going to take it to the ironing board and I'm going to press it to set the seams, and then I'll come back and I'll trim off that excess. Okay, so now we're going to just take our rotary cutter and we're going to cut, leave a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So you can see there wasn't very much waste on those borders, were there? Okay, so the next step will be to press that seam allowance open. Now, I told you that I did a patch in here, and right here is where my seam joined those two pieces together. If you have to piece it near the end, you want to make sure that you add on at least like about a 6-inch piece so that you don't end up with that patch being in your miter. So you want to make sure that you put enough extra on and then cut the extra off of the other end. But you can see how you can't even tell. And once that's quilted, it'll completely disappear. So let's press our seam open. I usually try to finger press that a little bit before I get the iron out here to do this, because the iron sometimes doesn't want to press a whole long seam like that open. There we go. Now we have a nice open seam. All right, I have one more corner to do, and I'm going to sew that, and I'll be right back, and I'm going to show you the whole quilt with 4 mitered borders. We'll be right back. So here is our Ironweed in the fog. And do you see what I said about using the ombre fabric, that it just looks like it's sending light right through the quilt? It's kind of a fun detail. And we just did it with 4 strips of fabric. All right, so can't wait to see what you're doing with your panels. I hope that you'll post those on the AQS Facebook page, which is AQS Online on Facebook. And if you're watching us on YouTube, I hope that you'll subscribe, because every time we post a new video, you'll get an email letting you know there's a new video up there for you to watch. We do have a special offer from Bernina. You know, I am a Bernina ambassador, and because of that, they send me these coupons for $100. If you buy a Bernina or Bernette machine valued at more than $1,000, you can get one of these coupons from me for a $100 rebate. It has to be between now and December 14th that you make your purchase. So if you're in the market for a Bernina, be sure to go to the description and send me an email so that I can send you one of those coupons so that you can turn that in for a $100 rebate. And before you leave, don't forget to go register for the giveaway. Our sponsors are providing some wonderful prizes, and some of you are going to win Bernina Branson, where we'll be doing a show in March, Panasonic with our iron, Ironmatic with our ironing board, Tracy's Tables with the table, and Starforest Quilts with the panel that we did today. Next time, we're going to do a panel that is spliced and a little bit of Fibonacci with it. So until then, be sure to show us your quilts. We want to see what you're making with your panels.